Hey, so this video is going to be discussing Islamophobia and why atheists are often perceived as Islamophobic. And for those of you that don't know, Islamophobia is the extreme fear or hatred of Muslims. And I used to actually have the same view as my icon, the former late great Christopher Hitchens, that Islamophobia was not real, and that basically it was fabricated by more politically correct liberals to stripe out, to embrace more of a multiculturalist, perspective when it came to everything, and just to be too politically correct that they would not even criticize Islamic majority countries. And sometimes that is true, but I have learned since becoming an atheist that very often that's not. That very often a lot of Christians and a lot of them, even some atheists, have a special level of antipathy towards Muslims living in the United States and other Western countries, even though they constitute a very small minority, and they are actually a very moderate sect of Muslims usually that live in Western countries. I'll admit, it took me a while to wrap my head around that, though, because I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian background, and I knew that Islam was in many ways related to the religion that I grew up with. It's not, a lot of the texts in the Quran and Bible are the same, so I never really had a deep-seated antipathy towards Muslims. In fact, I always grew up thinking they had more in common with us than atheists did, which is actually kind of true. And I still see it that way now that I'm an atheist. I sometimes don't understand the antipathy between them. But I realize now I'm getting older that it's not necessarily rooted in theological differences between Christianity and Islam, is why they're quibbling with each other. It's rooted in race, it's rooted in nationalism, it's rooted in prejudice. And that is why, there's so much hatred towards Muslims, and Muslims often there's a lot of hatred towards Christians. Now, here's where, atheists in general, though, are often perceived as Islamophobic. Muslims in the modern day world are, on the whole, vastly more conservative and fundamentalist than the average Christian. And that's, of course, a generalization. Not all Muslims are. There's a huge number of moderate Muslims out there. But especially in Middle Eastern and other Islamic-dominated countries, there are enormous conservative majority Muslims that endorse certain conservative practices in regards to gender, LGBTQ rights, pro-life / pro-choice issues that would not even be conceivable in a lot of Western countries. And the conservative majorities in these countries essentially crush the more moderate Muslim minorities. And they allow little, if any, room for Christians or atheists or other religions. So when atheists are criticizing these countries, these are usually whom we're criticizing, not Islamic minorities within Western countries, but often we are perceived as criticizing them when we levy harsh criticisms at these countries. And a good example of this was a YouTube video I once watched of Affleck being on Bill Maher's show with Sam Harris and a few others like Michael Steele, I think, former chairman of the RNC. And it was really unpleasant, though a little bit funny to watch, because Bill Maher just absolutely went off on, Ben Affleck just absolutely went off on Bill Maher and Sam Harris because he thought they were racist for some of the criticisms they levied at Islamic countries and, some of the practices. Because he just didn't believe that in some Islamic countries you could actually be put in jail for not being a Muslim. And he just didn't believe it. It is true. That's something I learned as a Christian from Christian missionaries that went over to those countries back when I grew up, listening to them come to our chapel services and talk. And their discrimination against LGBTQ rights communities and their, policies on gender and policies on sex are just absolutely atrocious, And again, this does not speak for moderate Muslims. Moderate Muslims exist in these countries, and they have to work incredibly hard to fight against, these kind of practices and are risking life and limb to do so. And I really do have all the respect in the world for those moderate Muslims. However, it's a tricky issue because you have to criticize the conservative Islamic majorities while also trying to make the allowance that you're not criticizing moderate Muslims, or countries like the U.S. or some European countries where Muslims are small and heavily discriminated against minorities. So it's really a very tricky issue, and this is going to sound weird, but honestly the best thing I've learned thus far as an atheist is just not to openly criticize Muslims too often. And I know it kind of, it's a little bit weird since there are very conservative Muslims and fundamentalist Muslims doing terrible things in certain countries. But the thing is that's not the country I live in. I live in the United States where I'm dealing with a primarily Christian majority. And you can criticize Muslims in other countries, but when you do, you always have to be careful to make that separation to say that you're not criticizing more moderate Muslims in those countries or here in the U.S., because they get enough hatred as it is. There is real-life Islamophobia on the part of Christians and even a few atheists here and there, and they don't need any more fuel added to that fire. So again, this is an issue that was one of the biggest mistakes I've thus far made as an atheist. And hopefully I'm just, making this so other atheists can learn from my mistake and so that I can continue to build on the knowledge I've gained. But, as usual, if you disagree, feel free to say so in the comment section below. And other than that, just thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.